Let me tell you something most people do not want to hear, because once they hear it clearly, they cannot keep lying to themselves in the same comfortable way. Every generation has its own costume of success. That costume changes, the trap does not. One generation wears a beautiful house. One generation wears a bigger lifestyle. One generation wears experiences and stories. One generation wears an aesthetic, a camera angle, a digital performance of taste and momentum, different costumes, same trap. That is where I want to begin, not with blame, with pattern. Because the biggest financial mistake every generation repeats is not being careless with money. It is more subtle than that. It is more socially rewarded than that. It is more dangerous than that. At some point, every generation absorbs a picture of what doing well is supposed to look like. No one has to sit you down and explain it. You breathe it in, you see it in neighbors, in movies, in ads, in parents, in colleagues, in the people your culture treats as proof that life is working. Then one day, when you are finally able to buy some version of that image, you do, of course you do. It feels natural, it feels deserved, it feels like progress. That is exactly why it is so expensive, if you want the mother line for everything I am about to tell you. Here it is. The one financial mistake every generation repeats is mistaking the visible signal of arrival for the actual substance of wealth. Then organizing life around protecting that signal while underfeeding the assets that would have made the arrival real. That is the line. Read it again. Because once you understand it, a lot of confusion disappears. You stop asking why careful people still get trapped. You stop asking why hard work does not automatically become security. You stop asking why two people with similar incomes can arrive at 50, 60, or 70 in completely different positions. You stop asking the wrong question. The wrong question is, what should success look like at my age? The right question is, what am I funding first? The costume of success or the engine of security? That is the adult question. That is the useful question. That is the question most people never ask until years have already been spent defending an image that never had enough structure beneath it. I learned a long time ago that people almost never get the life they say they want. They get the life their repeated priorities purchase. That is a harder sentence than most people prefer. They would rather believe that destiny is random, that they were uniquely unlucky, that the times changed too much, that other people had a hidden edge. Fine. Sometimes the times do change, sometimes the edge is real. None of that cancels the deeper pattern. The deeper pattern is that people keep paying for signs first and foundations second. That is the repeated mistake. It wears different clothes in every decade. Still the same mistake. Now let me show you what I mean. I want to start with Robert. He is 68. He bought the beautiful suburban house in the 1980s. From the outside, his story looked correct. That is important because many traps survive, not because they are irrational at the beginning, but because they begin with enough truth to keep people from questioning them. In Robert S. world, the house was not just a house. It was adulthood. It was proof. It was the American promise with a driveway attached. If your parents rented and you finally bought, that meant something. I understand that. Home ownership in that era was not fantasy. It really was a stronger bet than it often feels today. Inflation was high, rates were high, property could appreciate. The culture treated ownership as the central right of arrival. So when the bank approved Robert for the biggest mortgage he could qualify for, he took it. Of course he did. That was the move. That was what winning looked like. And here is the subtle danger. The house did what it was supposed to do on paper. It went up. It appreciated. It became valuable. The source material says Robert S. house is now worth roughly 4 times what he paid for it. That is not a trivial outcome. It means the asset itself was not the lie. The lie was letting the house become the whole plan. Faithful site Fay turn 55 file 0 Fay. That is the first real lesson. An asset can be good and still become a trap if it crowds out everything else. That is what happened to Robert. He maintained the symbol, the garden, the extensions, the neighborhood identity, the sense that the home itself represented security. Meanwhile, the pension never turned into what he thought it would. Corporate structures changed. The source material says his company restructured in the 1900s and the pension he expected did not remain what he imagined. That is exactly how life behaves. It changes the terms after you have already built around the old ones. Fay file site Fay turn 55 file 0 Fay. Now he is 68. Most of his net worth lives inside one illiquid object he lives in. Selling it would mean leaving the life around it. That means the asset is valuable and the freedom is constrained. That is the distinction. The home was not the mistake. The belief that the home was enough, that it was the whole architecture of arrival, that was the mistake. That is what I call the anchor illusion. The asset that makes you look secure can become the anchor that keeps you from using your own balance sheet flexibly later. That is a hard thing for people to admit because the story sounds so noble. I bought a home, I raised a family, I stayed put. Good. All of that may be admirable. It still does not mean the financial structure is complete. A person can be rich in equity and poor in optionality at the same time. That is where Robert ended up. That is not carelessness. That is a generation-specific costume covering the same old mistake. Now let me take you to Karen. Karen is 52. She has the career, the nice car, the holidays, the bigger house, the rhythm of respectable success. She is not frivolous, that matters. She is exactly the kind of person people point to and say, she has done well. And in some ways she has. That is why her trap is more dangerous. The source material gets this exactly right. Karen's generation did not usually make one giant vanity purchase and call that success. Her trap came through 100 smaller, reasonable upgrades. Every raise came with a life expansion attached. New role, better car, bigger salary, bigger house, children. S needs grow, the holiday scales upward too. Every choice made sense locally. Felicite, turn 55 file 0 locally. That is the problem. A lot of weak financial lives are built one locally reasonable decision at a time. The person never feels reckless. The person feels responsible. That is what makes the trap so elegant. Karen's generation watched dual incomes rise. They believed they would do better than the generation before them. In many cases they did earn more. But then something almost invisible happened. The lifestyle learned how to match the income step for step. That is what the source calls lifestyle creep. And I think that phrase is almost too soft for the damage it does. It sounds like a cute habit in reality. It is one of the most efficient wealth-killing systems ever normalized. Felicite, turn 55 file 0 because once your expenses grow as fast as your income, success never compounds. It just restyles itself. You still look successful. You still may even feel successful. But the gap between what comes in and what goes out stays oddly small relative to what it should have become. That gap is everything. A person earning more but keeping the same old gap is not building much freedom. He is upgrading the set design. That is what I call the lifestyle ratchet. Every time the income rises, the lifestyle clicks into a new place and refuses to move backward easily. Soon the person is doing well and still feels tight. That is because visible growth and actual surplus are not the same thing. Karen looks like she has arrived. The source material says that at 52 she has equity and assets. Yes, but also a much tighter retirement math than should be true after 20 years of strong earnings. Felicite, turn 55 file 0 that is the tell. When the image improves faster than the savings rate, the image is not harmless. It is eating the future. That is the generational costume Gen X wore so well. Not the big symbolic house is the whole plan. The constant monthly direct debit version of arrival. The paid for appearance of having made it. That is still the same mistake. Signal first, asset second. Now let me take you to Marcus. Marcus is 38, and before I say anything else, let me say what must be said plainly. The system really did move against a great many people in his generation. The source material is right to center the 2008 crisis as a formative wound for millennials. If you came into working life around then, the ladder had already shifted, home prices outran you, wages did not keep up the way earlier generations assumed they would, and the old signals of arrival felt farther away or impossible. Felicite, turn 55 file 0 that matters. It is real, but what matters just as much is what people did after that reality set in. If home ownership, pension certainty, and old school accumulation felt less accessible, another story rushed in to take their place: experiences. Travel, restaurants, concerts, trips, convenience, memories, the source material nails the cultural pitch. Spend on experiences, not things. Live your life. You cannot take it with you. The line was sold not only as indulgence, but as wisdom. That is what made it so persuasive. Felicite, turn 55 file 0 and there is truth inside it. Experiences can matter more than junk. A good life should be lived, not merely stored. That is not the mistake. The mistake is subtler. The mistake is when experiences become a substitute for building assets. That is what happened to Marcus. The source material says he racked up beautiful memories, genuinely, but by 38 he had little invested, no property, and a low-grade anxiety about the future that he managed partly by planning the next experience. Felicite, turn 55 file 0 that is the experience substitution trap. And it is one of the most emotionally seductive traps ever designed because it flatters the person's identity while draining the very thing that could have given those experiences a less anxious backdrop later. A passport full of stamps can still be a costume. A full social calendar can still be a costume. A life that feels richly lived can still be structurally underbuilt. That is what most people do not want to hear. They want to think the opposite of the old materialism is automatically wisdom. Not necessarily. It is only wisdom if the life still feeds assets. If not, then it is just a different kind of arrival theater, a different costume. Same function. This is why I always tell people that the enemy is not things versus experiences. The enemy is substitution. Anything used to replace asset building becomes a trap if it keeps getting chosen first. Marcus did not fail because he liked life. He stayed exposed because he let life performance fill the exact psychological place where ownership should have been growing. That is the mistake. Now, let me take you to Zoe. Zoe is 24, and she is the most interesting of the four because on paper she should be the one least vulnerable to the old trap. The source material says she is already 3 months into her investing journey and is more financially aware at 24 than anyone in her family history. That is not nothing. It means the language is arriving earlier. Now, index funds, compound interest, ISAs, brokers, online finance content, all of it shows up earlier for Gen Z. Phaelocite, Phay turn 55, file 0, Phay good. That is real progress, but the trap adapts. It always adapts. Gen Z did not inherit a house, base costume first. It did not inherit the quiet dual income suburban signal first. It did not inherit experiences alone. It inherited performance. The source material puts this beautifully for Gen Z. The arrival signal is the fit, the setup, the apartment that looks right on camera, the brands that communicate taste, and having arrived to an audience that may not even know you personally. Phay Phaelocite, Phay turn 55, file 0, Phay. That is the performance wealth trap, and it is cruel in a new way because it can coexist with financial literacy. That is what makes it so dangerous. You can know what an index fund is and still spend 4 times the monthly investment amount trying to make the outer image look wealthier than the underlying balance sheet. The source material says Zoe is putting around 50 pounds a month into investing while spending closer to 200 a month on things whose main function is how they look in her feed. That is the whole trap in one ratio. Phay Phaelocite. Phay turn 55, file 0, Phay, because now wealth language itself becomes part of the costume. The person talks about compounding freedom, long-term thinking, maybe even posts about it. Meanwhile, the actual number grows slowly because the aesthetic gets fed first. That is the newest version of the oldest mistake, signal first. Asset second, only now the signal is digital, portable, curated, always on, and because it is social, it recruits shame and identity even faster than the older costumes did. That is why this trap is so sophisticated. It does not ask Gen Z to be ignorant. It asks them to perform being financially aware while still prioritizing the visible impression over the compounding reality. That is one reason so many people who know the right things still do the wrong ones. Knowledge by itself does not save you if your reward system is tied to the look of arrival. Now let me say something important. Zoe is not doomed. Marcus is not doomed. Karen is not doomed. Robert is not doomed. The source material is very careful to say that none of these people are stupid or bad with money. They all just follow the unwritten rules. Their generation absorbed about what doing well was supposed to look like. Phay Phaelocite, Phay turn 55, file 0, Phay. That is exactly right. This is not a story about idiots. It is a story about imitation. Every generation copies its own respectable mistake. That is why the trap is so persistent. Nobody feels like they are doing something irrational. They feel like they are finally doing what the culture promised success would look like. Now let me take you into the deeper lesson. Every generation has a favorite arrival signal. For Robert, it was the home. For Karen, it was the upgraded life. For Marcus, it was the lived experience. For Zoe, it was the aesthetic proof. Different costumes, same function. The function is social reassurance. The function is being able to say, without saying it directly, I have arrived. And once the need for that signal moves ahead of asset construction, the same consequences follow. Not immediately. That is what makes it hard to see. Immediately the signal works. The house impresses. The holidays feel earned. The trips become memories. The feed looks strong. Good, the signal is doing its job. The cost shows up later. It shows up as underfunded pension accounts, as too little liquidity, as tighter retirement math than your income history should produce, as a missing asset base beneath a richly lived decade, as a beautifully curated life sitting on surprisingly small numbers. That is when people feel something is wrong, usually much later than they should. Now let me say something even harder. The world around you does not encourage escape from this trap. It encourages loyalty to it because the whole economy benefits when people buy the costume before they build the engine. Housing industries benefit, travel industries benefit, luxury and lifestyle brands benefit, advertising benefits, social platforms benefit, even other people benefit emotionally. Because when everyone around you is performing arrival, no one has to confront the possibility that a quieter path might be more intelligent. That is why escaping this trap feels socially strange. Not because it is wrong, because it violates the shared theater. The source material says the people who escape do something very simple and very difficult. They separate the signal from the substance. They choose to look less wealthy than they actually are, so the actual wealth can grow faster. Phay Phaelocite, Phay turn 55, file 0, Phay. That is the rule. And it is one of the best rules I know. Look less arrived, be more arrived. That is the escape, not forever. The source material is right to clarify this too. It is not an argument for permanent deprivation. It is an argument for assets first, lifestyle second, until the assets genuinely do enough work that the lifestyle is actually paid for rather than merely performed. Phay Phaelocite, Phay turn 55, file 0, Phay. That is a profound difference. A person may own a nicer house once the portfolio throws off enough strength. Good. A person may travel richly once the balance sheet can absorb it without weakening the future. Good. A person may enjoy design, beauty, hospitality, pleasure, all of it. Fine. The key is order asset first, lifestyle second, not the other way around, because once the order flips, the costume begins eating the engine. That is what every generation keeps relearning in its own language. Now let me show you what escape looked like for each of them. For Robert, the smarter version was never buy the house. Too shallow. The smarter version was buy the house and fund the pension aggressively too. Do not let one symbol absorb the whole concept of security. The source material says exactly this in its solution, framing keep the home. But do not let the home stand in for the whole retirement plan. Fay file site Fay turn 55 file 0 Fay for Karen. The move was not never enjoy the raise. Also too shallow. The move was one lifestyle upgrade per raise, not a full absorption of each income increase. The source material says bank part of every rise, let the income growth outrun the lifestyle growth. That is not glamorous. It is how real wealth gets built. Fay file site Fay turn 55 file 0 Fay for Marcus. The move was not never travel. Ridiculous. The move was one larger memory, not constant spending disguised as identity. The source material says something like one big trip, not four, and route the difference automatically into a compounding asset. That is the real correction. Fay file site Fay turn 55 file 0 Fay for Zoe. The move is not stop caring about style. Wrong, the move is to make the actual number outrun. The look of the number, the source material says she still has all the time in the world if she makes investing the thing that grows fastest, not the aesthetic around it. Fay file site Fay turn 55 file 0 Fay. That is the rule for all of them. Let the substance get ahead of the signal. That is how people leave the trap. Now I want to go deeper. Why is this so hard? Because human beings are social creatures before they are rational optimizers. The signal is immediate. The asset is delayed. That is the entire war. A house looks like a rival right now. A larger pension balance looks like a line item. A trip gives pleasure right now. An index fund contribution gives almost no emotional reward right now. Aesthetic spending changes how others see you right now. Compounding changes your freedom later. That is why the trap wins so often. It wins by controlling the timeline of pleasure, present applause versus future strength. Most people choose the present applause often enough that the future strength never gets large. That is not because they are weak. It is because they were never taught to distrust socially approved desires. I think that is one of the hardest lessons in all of finance. The things everyone around you respects are not automatically the things building your freedom. Sometimes they are the exact opposite. Now let me say something even more uncomfortable. A lot of people are not actually trying to become wealthy. They are trying to stop feeling behind. That is a completely different goal, and it produces very different spending. A person trying to become wealthy asks, what builds my position? A person trying to stop feeling behind asks, what helps me look okay again? That second question is the source of an enormous amount of generational damage, because being able to look okay again is almost always purchasable immediately. A nicer object, a nicer experience, a nicer image, a nicer environment, all very available, all very expensive when repeated. That is why I tell people this is not mainly a math problem. It is a social and psychological problem. First, the numbers only record the outcome of the deeper war. Now let me make the identity flip explicit. Most people think financial success is about finding the right asset. That is too small. The real issue is whether you can tolerate looking less successful than your generation expects for long enough that the assets underneath you become real. That is the flip. The world tells you to look arrived. The richer move is to become hard to see. Drive the older car, stay in the smaller house longer. Take fewer trips than your income would allow. Post less, signal less. Buy fewer props for the role. Build the number, build the claims, build the assets. That is the path. The source material says every generation that escapes eventually figures out the same rule. Assets first, lifestyle second, Fay file site Fay turn 55 file 0 Fay. Exactly. That is not a slogan. It is the operating law, because once assets do enough work, lifestyle becomes much less dangerous. Before then, lifestyle is a tax on the engine. That is the difference. Now let me step back and gather the whole machine. Robert shows you the single anchor trap. Karen shows you the lifestyle ratchet trap. Marcus shows you the experience substitution trap. Zoe shows you the performance wealth trap. 4 decades, 4 outwardly different lives. 1 underlying mistake. The signal was funded before the asset base was strong enough. That is the repeated error. And it is why I say every generation keeps making the same financial mistake in different costumes. Now let me bring the operating system together in plain language. First, identify your generation's preferred costume of arrival. Second, ask whether you are funding that costume faster than you are funding your asset base. Third, choose one visible upgrade you could delay for a year and redirect the difference into something that compounds. Fourth, let income growth outrun lifestyle growth on purpose. Fifth, remember that a life can look rich and still be underbuilt. Sixth, stop using spending to cure the feeling of being behind. Seventh, make assets first, lifestyle second, the rule. until the assets are genuinely doing enough work that the lifestyle has been earned twice, not once. That is the operating system, not shame, not austerity worship sequence. Now let me put the blade into this as cleanly as I can. The one financial mistake every generation repeats is not that they want too much. It is that they learn too early what success is supposed to look like and too late what security is actually made of. That is the truth. And if you remember nothing else from what I said, remember this. The costume of arrival is always cheaper in the short run than the substance of wealth. That is why so many people buy it first. Your advantage begins the moment you stop asking how to look like you have arrived and start asking what would make the arrival real, even if nobody clapped while you were building it.